Welcome to the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I'm Laura DiFrancesco, your host. We're talking all about mergers and acquisitions, buying and selling small businesses, as well as corporate law. We are taking our experience closing over $10 billion of transactions since founding Dean Street Law 5 years ago, and my experience being an M&A and corporate attorney for over a decade and making it accessible to you as an entrepreneur. I hope that this helps you in navigating the complex world of mergers and acquisitions. And also, we're always happy to be a resource for you here at Dean Street Law. You can always apply to work with us through our complimentary consultations linked in our show notes. And a huge shout out and thank you to everyone who's subscribed and left us a 5-star review. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and also leave us a 5-star review. It's one of the best ways to support us as a small business. And also be sure to share with your friends and colleagues on social media, through text, email, or however is easiest. It means the world to us that you're supporting our content and helps us make more to support you in your journey. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I'm your host, Laura DiFrancesco, founder of Dean Street Law, our boutique M&A law firm specializing in representing buyers and sellers of lower middle market businesses, including family-owned businesses like we'll be talking about momentarily. I'm also the founder of Ethereal Farms, with luxury Airbnbs next to our winery and vineyard. My husband and his brother started Wayvine Winery and Vineyard. Flourish Co-working and Event Space, which you can see right here behind me, which has office space and event space, as well as Laura DiFrancesco LLC for our books and courses. We have our upcoming book, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, a legal guide to buying a small business. So if you are buying a business and would like more information about the details, how to strategize, how to be the best informed and not just make a profit, but make a profit based on the terms, turning terms into profit through understanding the legal aspects of buying a business. We have so much to chat about, so you can download the first chapter through the link in our show notes and explore more about that. It would mean the world to us if you leave us a 5-star review, if you're able to, and be sure to pre-order the book. So that's just one of our many educational resources. We also have Acquisition Insights, a course on the legal aspects of buying a business with over 80 video lessons, written materials, guides, checklists, and more. It includes our battle-tested LOI templates, as well as our new LOI masterclass, which you can download for free. It's going to share more about what you should look for in a letter of intent and the various aspects if you're using a template that's not ours to make sure you're doing it correctly if you're trying to DIY it, or if you'd like a little bit more support, of course, you can do the Acquisition Insights with the course and templates bundle with our battle-tested LOI templates and more, as well as work with Dean Street Law for your letter of intent. So we can strategize so you can turn terms into profits, because you can literally walk into a deal with more profit on day one, having the right terms in place, than if you just did it and winged it yourself, having no experience negotiating LOIs, buying a business, and more. So we've got so much information on that in our books and our educational resources. Those are just 4 of a couple of other companies that I have. But today I'm excited to share with you about acquiring a family-owned business. I come to you about this, speaking about this in multiple different respects. First, as someone who has family-owned businesses, a couple of my businesses that I did not share are owned with family members, such as real estate investments and others. And then as someone who is constantly, around this from the fact that I have multiple of my own family-owned businesses, but then also my whole family's entrepreneurs. I grew up with generations of entrepreneurs myself and have been around family-owned businesses since I was born. I'm in them myself and also regularly counsel buyers and sellers of family-owned businesses. There's so much to think about in a family-owned business, and there's so many different things to consider when we're talking about LOI terms and post-closing integration and all of those kinds of things, because whether you're on the buy side or sell side of a family-owned business, there's a lot to consider, especially in terms of how to handle the emotional aspects of it, as well as the identity of the business, the tradition of the business, transitioning that to another owner, as well as succession expectations of ownership, especially in family-owned business. There can be a lot of expectations or conversations, whether out loud or behind the scenes, about succession planning and transition of ownership. So there's a lot to unpack there. And then some things that buyers should be aware of, some different key things that we're going to be asking in terms of questions in the transfer of the business and transition of the business. So if you are buying a family-owned business, check out the rest of this episode. We have so much more to share. Now, first aspect of a family-owned business is the internal decision making. In any business, when you're buying a business, there are internal decision makers and there are external decision makers. And understanding who those people are and who influences the decision making is really important to navigate the process successfully. When you're buying a business, you always want to ask and understand before you sign the LOI, before you present the LOI, who exactly owns the business and in what ownership percentages do they own the business. And you may be surprised to find that the person who has said the entire time that they own the business actually do not own 100% of the business. They may own a majority of the business or a significant stake of the business, but they may not own all of the business. This is especially common in family-owned businesses where maybe one member of the family is the most active member of the family and have the highest percentage of ownership interest. Or it may simply be that the family has designated one person to be in charge of selling the business, and then the rest are kind of staying in the loop behind the scenes. In addition, you may also find that there are stakeholders such as spouses or children or other stakeholders that you may not be interacting with on a day-to-day business, especially in a family-owned business, that may have significant influence on the acceptance of those terms and how the deal is negotiated, how it progresses, whether it stalls out, whether there's concerns out of left field that you had no idea about. So all of those should be taken into consideration. And it's just the conversational type of inquiry where you want to have as the buyer to understand the owners of the business, but also to understand the stakeholders in deciding the business. So you might just ask as the buyer to the seller, are there any folks that you're speaking with at home or friends about the transaction? I'm happy to speak with them more about it and bring them into the fold. A lot of the time, buyers have a general understanding from conversations about whether spouses are involved in decision making. Most of the time they are. And if they're going to bring the seller out to dinner or a meeting or something like that, after an initial conversation with the seller themselves, they might also invite family members or spouses to really get a presence and relationship built between the buyer and the seller. We've represented buyers where the husband in the relationship owned the business and primarily was the majority holder and negotiated the sale of the business. But then all of a sudden, the wife, which was not a part of the day-to-day operations, was brought in to after the LOI had been signed, but wouldn't meet with the buyer and was very contentious. Now, I will say that this is really, really not the norm. Typically, you have two parties that are aligned. The buyer and the seller are aligned. The seller parties are pretty aligned. But I give this as a way of caution because there wasn't enough of a relationship built with the spouse, I think, early on enough for it to be a more productive relationship going forward. And she still had a significant portion of the business that she owned, even though she wasn't involved in the day-to-day of the business. And so it's really important to make sure that all stakeholders are on the same page and aligned with the sale of the business, and that the buyer doesn't just develop a relationship with the primary owner of the business, but the other additional owners of the business, as well as their stakeholders, which are generally family members, spouses, children, and close friends that are going to be advising them on the sale of the business. So they may not take everybody out to lunch or dinner or something like that, but certainly spouses are a really big consideration, especially in a family-owned business. Now, there's a lot of those internal dynamics and decision making, and so you're going to through conversation and just natural questions, identify who the decision makers are and who's influencing decision making. With that said, there are a lot of components within that of legacy, succession planning, and emotions. And there can be expectations in a family-owned business that perhaps someone was going to inherit the business and they were expecting to be able to take it to the next level themselves, and they may or may not own a part of the business and may have planned financially to own the business at some point. So it's helpful, especially in a family-owned business, to ask, have you talked about succession planning with your family? What have the expectations been? Is there an interest in family members that are a part of the business to be involved post-closing? And seeing how you can work through those different considerations so that there isn't tension between legacy and succession planning and your acquisition of the business. And then further to that question, asking more about their intentions around legacy, what they're looking forward to after closing, what they want to achieve after closing and the transition of the business. Really understanding seller motivations here is important, because preserving legacy, especially for a family-owned business, especially when their name is on the door, is really important. A lot of the time, employees are important to those sellers. They want to make sure that their employees are well taken care of, that they have the same or better compensation and benefits post-closing, that they're guaranteed employment for a certain period of time. And a lot of the time, that continuity and those promises are also beneficial to the buyer. So a lot of the time, those are working in harmony, but understanding those will help you present a more favorable offer to the seller and make them more comfortable with selling the business. Because ultimately, a lot of the time in a family-owned business and in many seller-owned businesses, they're looking not just to take care of themselves, but also to take care of the people that helped them build the business. Now, there are a couple wrinkles that we're going to talk about later, which is where there are family members who are employees of the business or on the payroll of the business. We're going to be talking about that later, because that's a whole nother consideration. And when we're thinking of their name being on the door and that legacy and handing it over to an outsider, there may be special considerations also around trademark and the rights to the name and how that may be used, or the rights to the likeness of the seller or their family or something like that. Oftentimes, one of the ways that you can both help a seller feel that same importance of legacy and how much you as the buyer value that legacy is a promise to have them keep the title of founder, even when they're not an employee or owner or independent contractor of the business. They can still be listed as the about page as the founder. Oftentimes that backstory and history is a part of the rich reason why the business is as valuable as it is. There's a huge preference for small family-owned businesses as a consumer in the US, and we want to support small, locally family-owned businesses. And so having them on the about page and promising that continuance of the title of founder, if that's important to them, and keeping them on the about page as the founder of the company can be a great way to show how you can continue their legacy and preserve their name in the business, so that when they feel like they're handing it off to an outsider per se, that it's not a different direction that they're totally taking the business in, but rather a continuation of that legacy. And you can still maintain your own vision for the business while maintaining that legacy. I think it's very important to be transparent about where you want to take the business and how you want to grow and lead the business, so that you're able to transition it successfully, so that it's not just holding pattern of that legacy, but rather using that legacy as a solid foundation of the business and then growing from that foundation and putting your mark on the business as an owner and being able to grow beyond its current space and perhaps even better support employees and community members and honestly enrich that legacy through growth and pivoting and being a part of your vision, but not wholesaling, disappearing and leaving that era of the business behind. So it's a really fine-tuned process, more of an art than a science, of how to transform a business and transition a business, keeping that legacy, building on that legacy, and transitioning it into the next era. When it comes to navigating corporate law, entrepreneurship, and managing small businesses, experience matters. Dean Street Law is a boutique corporate firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions and additional focus in real estate, commercial transactions, finance, and corporate governance. With over $10 billion in deals closed, Dean Street Law has extensive experience representing hundreds of clients in thousands of transactions, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Whether you need startup guidance or advice on closing multi-million or multi-billion-dollar deals, we're your trusted partner every step of the way. Visit deanstreetlaw.com in the show notes to schedule a complimentary consultation. The most important things to build trust, especially when someone's name is on the business and there's a lot of emotions in the business, where there's a family-owned business, this can be even more so. I will say there are a lot of emotions in the process of selling a business for any seller, because it is their heart and soul that they have poured into something outside of themselves. It is almost like a family member itself, the business, because they have put their name behind it, put their reputation behind it, built it to be an entity outside of themselves that operates in its own right. So it has a significant piece of themselves. For any seller, it will be an emotional process to sell a business, particularly one that they've built for decades or even generations. With respect to the emotions of a business that's a family-owned business, that will be even more so, especially if their name's on the door, if they've built it with their family members, if it feels like a part of a dinner conversation, a part of a family conversation, it's going to be even more tied to them. And so really making sure that they're comfortable with selling the business and communicating clearly about what to expect in the process, making it as seamless as possible. On the buy side, there's really this huge preference to minimize costs for as long as possible and then engage counsel as late as possible and make it a fluster of activity leading up to closing. When you're talking about a really emotional transition, for it to be kind of dragged out of due diligence and then all of a sudden a month and a half or a month prior to closing you're doing documentation, that's just a huge emotional wave to put onto the seller. So you really want to be working with counsel who is going to be engaged early on in the process and taking advantage of the full time from the time that the LOI is signed to the time of closing, and throughout that process communicating expectations. We at Dean Street Law do this in several respects. First, as soon as the LOI is signed, we want to be engaged so we can make sure that it's a calm, progressive transition and not a chaotic one that will cause people to take those emotional waves out on one another or deteriorate or derail the deal. That's the worst thing that can happen. And often steady, calm momentum with clear communication can be one of the best solutions in order to avoid the dangers of emotions disrupting the progression of the deal. And you also want to make sure that you're involving the seller as the buyer the entire way throughout the process so that it has a clear, calm progression rather than an erratic array of needing their time and having them so involved and then them not hearing from you for weeks while you're behind the scenes doing the quality of earnings or whatever it is. And as the buyer, you need to be showing forward progress to them, because while you're doing due diligence, all it is an exchange of take from the seller, taking a lot of information, taking confidential information, going through the underwriting process. Many sellers may not have had a lot of debt on the business, so they may not be used to answering so many questions, and it may be a very invasive process if it's not something that they have gone through with underwriters previously or recently. And so when you're going through that process of due diligence, it needs to be asking, but also giving, and giving them knowledge about what to expect throughout the process. So as soon as the LOI is signed at Dean Street Law, we are providing a closing checklist and timeline that can be communicated to the seller so that they know what to expect throughout the entire process and when things need to be started and when things need to end for us to close on time. Oftentimes, both the financial aspect of a deal and the timing aspect of a deal can be very influential to sellers and can be affecting one another. So the timing of the deal can very much affect the finances of the seller in many different ways. So you need to be not only proactive in communicating expectations through closing checklist and timelines and working with counsel that's proactive like we are at Dean Street Law, but also doing your best to make sure that you're progressing along that timeline that you've communicated expectations around so that they are constantly moving forward and building trust in your relationship instead of a situation where it is deteriorating trust or impacting their confidence in you and your ability to get the deal done. Now, the next item is valuation and negotiation challenges. So valuation in any business, but especially a family-owned business, can be emotional because not only is that a financial component, but that's their entire life work and perhaps generations of life work. And to them, that financial component is even more emotional. Yes, it's how they can exit and what they can do with those funds post-closing, but it's also putting a number on their life's work. So be cognizant about that it may not just be financial considerations, first of all, but also that financial considerations are going to be very influential and maybe an emotional conversation. As I mentioned, there may be non-financial considerations such as retaining employees, legacy, and those things. Thinking about buying a business? Unlock the secrets of successful acquisitions with Acquisition Insights, your legal roadmap for success. With over 81 modules of video lectures, written materials, guides, and checklists, we provide in-depth guidance to navigate every step of the process. From initial interest to closing the deal, get the expertise you need to make informed decisions. You can also access our battle-tested templates in the Acquisition Insights course and templates bundle, including our template LOIs, letters of intent, pre- and post-LOI due diligence request list, material deal terms lists, and more. Visit lauradifrancesco.co/the-shop today and take the first step towards buying your dream business. All the links are in the show notes. So how can you navigate expectations around negotiations and valuations in a way that's realistic and positive? First off, use counsel. Your primary goal as the buyer should be maintaining a positive relationship with the seller. There are going to be things that need to be ironed out. And of course, being transparent and kind and honest in how you negotiate and having counsel that is compassionate and kind and communicative in their negotiation is really important. And then having good expectations and saying, first off, if you're setting forth the terms of the LOI, your documentation should be following the LOI unless there's a material difference in the conversations that you've had since the LOI has been signed. So not just putting forth the terms of the LOI and then documenting it completely differently and blindsiding the seller. Obviously, that's going to erode trust, and the expectations around negotiations will be skewed, but rather saying, this is the foundation of the LOI. We're going to document it, expect, especially if a seller's never sold a business before, they may not understand that even for a $2 million business that the purchase agreement will probably be 25 to 30 pages and that there's going to be 10 to 15 documents required for the sale of the business legally, especially if it's a business that they're not contracting a lot, they're not working with attorneys a lot, it may not be something that they're thinking about. So previewing with them so that they know what to expect. And in terms of valuation, and a family-owned business, sometimes it's helpful to get a third-party valuation. And this isn't as common in deals under 5 million. You see it more in deals above 10 million or where there's related parties involved in the transaction, but it can be helpful to have a third-party valuation and understand what the assumptions are on that valuation if the parties generally agree that makes sense. It's not always going to make sense in every deal, especially not in a competitive deal that's widely marketed and you have a better sense of valuation. But in maybe you're an employee buying a family-owned business or something like that, that might be a situation where having a neutral third party that reviews valuation and has conversations about what would be normal, what to expect can be helpful. If the seller has a broker, most of the time they've had those conversations around what to expect, and they may be normal valuations or they may not be. Obviously, you should know that early on in the LOI process, and you'll be able to work through the valuation process. When you engage counsel that is very familiar with negotiating these types of transactions, not just the biggest private equity-backed acquisitions, it can really help you to have counsel that will assist you in making sure that the process is fair and respectful. It's very important when working with any seller, but especially in a family-owned business, that the terms that you set forth are fair and the conversations are respectful. When things get emotional, that's the easiest time for those to break down, for communication, trust, progress to all break down, and that's one of the greatest risks for a broken deal. So we at Dean Street Law have a very fair, but obviously representing our client very well, perspective in deal making. We want to put forth the documents that are going to be protecting our client, but easy for the parties to agree upon. We know what's market. We know how to have fair, respectful conversations. There are so many different opposing counsel that we've worked with that have made the conversation deteriorate, disrespectful. That's not going to help you get a deal done, especially in this type of scenario. So that's really important. And then if the emotions do get too high and the conversation begins to deteriorate, let emotions cool and make sure to use counsel that's going to represent you well to navigate that part of the conversation. And if there's hard conversations to have, sometimes it's better to have those legal, iron things out. Sometimes if the legal counsel on the other side is getting off the walls and disrespectful, sometimes it's better for the business team to have a conversation and then iron things out and then have legal document it. So we work through those strategic conversations with our clients so that we're able to progress the deal forward meaningfully and get to closing in a good amount of time. So with that said, because this is a more challenging business to navigate in certain respects, you want to make sure you have time in the timeline to be able to make this a productive, meaningful, progressive path forward so that it's not chaotic, erratic, and going to cause tempers to flare and emotions to rise. You want to have the right legal support who can help you navigate this process. We are well-versed in representing buyers and sellers of family-owned businesses, and I have my own family-owned businesses and have been around it since the beginning of my time. So it's something we're well suited for. If you'd like to schedule a consultation call, you're welcome to do so. We'd love to speak with you and share how we can support you in your transaction. Miss Molly is here. I don't know if you can see her in the camera, but we just wanted to share if there's anything else that you'd like us to talk about on the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. We'd love to hear it. In the meantime, please share the podcast with friends and other folks in the deal making space. The best thing that you can give us is a 5-star review and sharing our name and podcast with people you know. So thank you so much in advance for your support of our podcast. That helps us make more content and support you more throughout your process of buying and selling a business. We hope to hear from you soon. You're welcome to schedule a consultation call with us or connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear more about what you're doing and what you're hoping to achieve. In the meantime, cheers and happy deal making. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco podcast. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and that it brought you one step closer to mastering the art of mergers and acquisitions. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Dealmaking with Laura DiFrancesco on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in our discussion, please leave a 5-star review. It would mean the world to us. And share this podcast with your network, friends, and colleagues. For more in-depth resources, be sure to visit our website, deanstreetlaw.com, where you can find articles, guides, and more information on our services. Don't forget to follow us on social media for the latest episodes, updates, tips, and exclusive content. You can find us on LinkedIn, Search Funder, at LMDiFrancesco on X, and at Dean Street Law on Instagram. Join us on our next episode where we'll explore more deal-making insights. Cheers and happy deal making.